Thank you. Thank you, Wendy, for that very kind introduction. And it's very apropos because the topic that we're going to talk about today has largely been made possible by the funding that was made, and I might add, an unlikely investment that the Geraldine R. Dodge Foundation made in arts education data more than a decade ago. And I'd also like to thank Janet and the Planning Committee for inviting me to be here today to address this distinguished audience on what I believe to be one of the most important topics, one of the most important strategies that we can implement regarding arts education and trying to get to that point of arts education for every child. And what I'm talking about is, I believe, it's the data revolution. And the data revolution is really important in this whole process because one of the things that we talk about regarding data and access to data is the fact that it's not really been there as it relates to arts education. We heard it a lot today that it's not there or we don't have access to it. But right now, there's this whole new phenomenon about the explosion of arts education data, of big data in general. The systems for gathering information on everything from where we drive, to where we shop, to what sites we visit, to where we text, to what places we go for our dining when we dine out. Data in this country is everywhere. It is absolutely everywhere. In nearly all facets of our lives, in nearly all facets of our economy, our culture, and the world as a whole. There's not one aspect of our modern society that has not been touched, influenced, or transformed by the presence of data. Not one. This is the data revolution that we're talking about. Now, data in and of itself is not new. But what's new is the ubiquity of it, the amount of it. So before we go on this journey, and in order to allow you to actually participate and to bring you inside the club of big data and what's happening, I need all of you to raise your right hand and repeat after me. Okay, ready? Data is my friend. Hallelujah. There you go. Data is my friend, and by the end of this presentation, data is going to be your friend too. So I'd like to talk about what today's quest is. And what we're going to accomplish this afternoon in the brief time that we have together is to answer the following questions. Why are arts education data important? What is driving the creation of arts education in this country? How do we know there's actually a need for this data, although we've kind of been talking about it all morning? What do arts education data look like? What is this stuff that he's talking about? What will arts education data tell us? What's the knowledge to be gained from it? How does this knowledge then drive transformation in our schools? How does it create change? And then ultimately, how do we exploit this opportunity? To Daniel's point earlier, what's the solution to the problem that we're going to be discussing? Now, the first question we're going to talk about is, why are arts education data important? And I'm going to start by kind of taking you through how I actually got involved in this whole field. And, look, when your parents go to your child and they say, what do you want to be when you grow up? No one's going to raise their hand and go, ooh, I want to be a big data scientist, right? And it certainly wasn't the thing that I said. Ultimately, I ended up going to college. I wanted to be a musician, or, well, actually, not really a musician. I wanted to be a drummer. All right? And some of you laugh, but there is a difference between musicians and drummers, and it's actually been codified in federal law. So we know that there is a difference. You see, in the 1930s, the U.S. Army Band Manual was published, and it said that all U.S. Army bands will be made up of 32 musicians and 3 drummers. So that's how we know that there's a difference. So fast forward after college, I ended up working for a company called Pearl Drums. Now the world's largest percussion company. At the time, we were a low-end drum set manufacturer and beginning to expand our product line. This is in 1988, okay, 27 years ago. And our senior executives came to me and said, Bob, we're interested in expanding our product line. We want to get involved in the education space. So we want you to develop a plan for how we might get into it, type of products that we're going to need, the size of the market, things of that nature. And so as we started to work on the plan, one of the things that I knew that I needed to figure out was, what's the size of the market? So 1988, I start going to work. I'm like, what's the size of the market? And actually, the question was, how many schools have instrumental music programs? That was the question in 1988. Simple question. Should be easy enough to find the answer. So I call up MENC, who is now the National Association for Music Educators. I go, so how many schools have instrumental music programs? Well, we don't know. Well, what do you mean you don't know? You're the National Association for Music Education, right? They didn't know. They said they could tell me how many teachers there were, or actually then they qualified it. Well, we can tell you how many members we have, which is not necessarily representative of how many music teachers there are, which is not representative of how many schools have programs. So then I went to the trade association, and I called up the National Association for Music Merchants. Being the part of a drum company, they were our trade association. So I called up NAM and I said, so how many schools have instrumental music programs? And they're like, we don't know. Like, what do you mean you don't know? You're the trade association. The fundamental job of a trade association is to gather data. But they didn't know. And this changed the trajectory of my entire career. That one question. Because as a businessman, and that's the kind of entree point that I have to this whole issue, as a businessman, there are very important measures that we use in business. Profit and loss, market share, market growth. These are how we determine the health of our institution. Are we more profitable, or are we losing money? Is our market share growing or shrinking? Or what about the market itself? Is the market growing or shrinking? This is how we judge how we're doing as a business. Now use that frame to think about arts education. And if we have the information, what would arts data tell us? Well, it would tell us how many students are enrolled in the arts. It would tell us how many teachers we have teaching the arts. How many schools are providing arts instruction? In what art forms? And in what arts courses? Who has access? More importantly, who does not? And at the end of the day, how does any of this change over time? We are trying to provide the same type of lens through this area. Now, the theme for today's presentation, what's the theme? Every child, every school, right? Every child in every school. Not some children in some schools, right? Not the gifted and talented kids in the affluent schools. Every child in every school. Now, I hear this all the time from political leaders. Oh, we want arts for every child. You know, I hear it from the president. Oh, arts for every child. Or senators, or education policymakers, or commissioners of education. Oh, yes, we want the arts for every child. Well, if we want the arts for every child, how will we ever know when we get there if we don't even bother to count? How are you going to know that you get there? Arts for every child is a wish, unless there's a plan behind it to figure out how we get there. And that's why arts education data is so important. You see, in order to get to where you want to go, we have to know where we are. So that begs the question, where are we? That's why arts education data is important, because it tells us where we are. More kids or less kids. More programs or fewer. Are we making improvements, or do we see that ourselves are in some sort of state of decline? That's why arts education data is important. Now, the big question that I'm going to spend some time with on you before we start diving into some data is, what is creating the opportunity for there to be arts education data to begin with? And I'm going to take you through a little bit of a history lesson here, because it's been a 30-year journey to get to the point where what I'm talking about today is actually feasible. And it starts in California in the 1970s. The California Department of Education created their CBEDS data system. That stands for the California Basic Education Data System, because they believed that it was important to have data housed on what was happening in every school across the state of California. So that was the beginning of the development of data systems at the state level. Then in 1988, I just shared with you the story of how the music industry started to make some noise about the fact that there wasn't music education data. Once I started making noise, then the other companies started making noise about the fact that this was the issue. But the first trigger point that makes this all possible is 1994. And in 1994, Goals 2000 Educate America Act was signed into law by President Clinton, led by Secretary of Education Dick Riley. And this is important because it's the first time in our history that arts education was codified in federal law as a core subject. Now, that phrase, the arts as a core subject, is going to be critical to some of the other elements that we're going to talk about today. Fast forward to 2001, and we have, ta-da, No Child Left Behind. Or as I like to say, No Child Left Untested. So in 2001, No Child Left Behind comes in, but what it does do is it also then recodifies the arts as a core subject, an important point. In 2005, though, states started to, or the Department of Education started talking to states about the fact, like, well, golly gee whiz, since we have to start gathering data because of No Child Left Behind and all the testing measures that we're requiring, shouldn't we think about having some sort of similar standards to how we're doing this? So that came about in 2005. And at the same time then, a group of business leaders came together to create the Data Quality Campaign, organizations that were concerned about how to use data to improve student achievement, to help create a framework and some measures and best practices about gathering of data in the country. 2005 was also when we did the first arts education census project in New Jersey. This was the first time any state had actually done a building-by-building census on the status and condition of arts education at a statewide basis. That would then lead us to develop the framework for how something like this may be done on a national level. In 2007, we had the passage of something called the America Competes Act. All right, how many of you have heard of the America's Competes Act? There we go. Awesome. How many of you have heard of Beyonce? Right? Okay, so the America Competes Act was really a federal law that was pushed forward by the Bush II administration. And that law was really designed to, what are the things that we need to do as a country to become more competitive globally? And one aspect of it dealt with education. And in the America Competes Act, it says the key components for the development of our state longitudinal data systems should include unique statewide student identifiers, the ability for us to follow a student, not by their name, not by some way that they can be individually identified, but in a way that their information could be uniquely identified, a key component of the system. It also called for information on their student level enrollment, their demographic data, program participation information, again for every student. It then also went so far as wanting to be able to track when a student enters and exits the system, where they move between schools, whether they drop out, or whether they complete their P through 16 education programs. Does everyone know what P through 16 is? Okay, for those that don't, you're used to K-12, right? Well, P16 means successful completion of college. So now they want to track the success of a student from preschool all the way until they successfully get through college. So we have the America Competes Act. Then in 2009, ta-da, the Great Recession hits. And the federal government comes up with this idea, the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, to funnel hundreds of billions of dollars into the system, $100 billion into the education system, including funding for states to build longitudinal data systems. So now there's money being given to the states to help them develop this. But there was one thing that we didn't have. There was no clear directive on what the states would gather on. What courses would the states gather information on? Would they get to make it up on their own? And that was a concern of ours at the time, and so we got together with the folks at CDAE, which stands for the State Education Agency's Directors of Arts Education. So CDAE is not another day of the week. It's not Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, C-Day, Saturday, Sunday, right? It is the Directors of Arts Education within our state agencies. And we have two of them here today. We've got Julie Palkowski, who is from this great state of Wisconsin, from the Department of Education. And we also have my good friend Pam Paulson from the Perpich Center here in Minnesota. The Perpich Center, by the way, is the only state agency in the United States dedicated exclusively to arts education. It's a very cool model. If you haven't read up on it, I would urge you to go on their website to learn more about what they're doing. So we got together and talked about the fact that there weren't a set of specific subjects that were articulated that they would be gathering data on. So we went and met with the Chief State School Officers Association and explained to them our concern about how this would create uneven reporting across the country. And they invited us to present to their data managers in the fall of 2009. So we went into their data managers in 2009 and created a proposal which they then put in front of the chiefs, and the chiefs ultimately put into action as policy. And the key item here says, all data collection on school courses, teachers, and number of students enrolled should include all core academic subjects as defined by ESEA. So because the arts are defined as a core subject, we didn't have to go in and go, oh, please, please keep the arts in there, please put the arts in. We were able to go in and advocate for all core subjects. That's the logic that they bought, and that was what enabled us to ensure that the states were required to gather data on arts education. So now that they're required to do the data on arts education, how do we define what it is that they're looking for? So we worked with the National Center for Education Statistics on developing arts course codes. Now, they had a set of arts course codes that they developed 15 years prior to this, but they were not relevant to current practice. So working with CDAE, we got together with all of the arts education professional associations in dance, music, theater, and visual art to redo these course codes so that there would be a course code framework to underlie this work. Then in 2011, the America Competes Act was reauthorized, and in 2013, the recommendations that we made to the Department of Education for course codes were adopted. And these are the two books that were established: the School Courses for the Exchange of Data, the SCEDS system for the high schools, and then we also created a new set called the Prior to Secondary School Course Classification System. These are the two operational documents that the states now have, so that they're gathering data in a similar fashion. So that three-dimensional design in Minnesota means the same thing as three-dimensional design in Texas, as the same thing in three-dimensional design in New Jersey. Very, very, very important part of this whole process. So now, when we talk about what's creating the opportunity, well, we know states have committed to building longitudinal data systems. We know the federal government has determined what would be in there because of America Competes. We know funding was made available through the stimulus package. We know the chiefs determined what subjects would be in there, and we have established the set of course codes that would be used to populate the system. That's the opportunity. But it took us 30 years to get here. Okay? So we're one of those overnight successes. Wow, we can do this now. And it only took 30 years to do it. Now, in 2005, this is what state longitudinal data systems look like in the United States. Blue means we're just now starting to figure it out. When we fast forward to 2011, orange means they've figured it out, that they actually have operational data systems in their states. More importantly for us, though, is how many of them have arts education data in their longitudinal data systems. So in 2014, we know that 23 states currently have arts education data in their systems representing 61% of the entire student population in the United States. By 2018, this number goes to 40 states, representing 91% of our student population. 40 states will have systems in place where we will be able to track the actual enrollment and participation in arts education in this country. So that is what's creating the opportunity for us. So the next question is, how do we know there's need? Well, we know there's need because all these states have done their own state reports. So we've got state reports that have been done by a number of states trying to quantify what's happening to music and arts education and access to these programs. Interestingly, we know that 25 states have actually created their own report in some way, shape, or form. But of those 25 states, only 2 have used longitudinal data, New Jersey and Ohio. Oh, and I might say that this year it's actually 3 because our good friends in the state of Arizona and Alex Nelson, who's here from the Arizona Commission, they are now actually adding longitudinal data to their arts education data reports. So we see what's happening, but by 2018, we're talking about 91% of all students will have access. So the information exists. The challenge is states lack the funding or capacity to actually unlock the information in any meaningful way. So we know that states are being asked to engage in data-driven decision-making. It's part of what they're supposed to be doing. That they lack the funding or internal resources to create knowledge from the data that is there. That there's inconsistencies between the ways that the states are actually analyzing and reporting the information, and that there's inefficiencies because of divergent approaches. You know, we've got different states trying to do the same thing in very, very different ways, and there's no measurement for existing policies. Now, we heard this morning this bit about policies, right? Here's the one thing I've learned in 28 years of doing this stuff. Policies without accountability are not worth the paper they're written on at all. So having some way to have some sort of accountability system in this process is very, very important. So what do arts education data look like? What is this stuff that you're talking about? Well, it looks like we talked about the building blocks. It's based on students based on their unique ID, courses and classes based on course codes, teachers based on unique IDs, and by grade level. At what grade is the instruction offered, and how many boys, how many girls are in that instruction. And it's organized at the school building level. Can anyone tell me why we organize at the building level? Because if you look at it at the district level, you will miss all the nuanced differences between individual schools. The work in New Jersey showed us that in the same school district, you will have great differentiation between arts education programs. And if you have one that has everything and one that has nothing, and you look at it at the district level, it looks like they're average, right? And you miss the fact that, oh my goodness, that school has nothing. So by organizing the data at the school level, it allows us to really get very granular about what's happening with arts programs. So now I'm going to take you into the data system for the state of New Jersey to show we're not going to talk about theory. This is not theoretical. We're going to talk about real data. So here's the setup. In New Jersey, we've got 2,312 schools, 2,220 public schools, and 92 charters. We have 604 school districts, right? 604 school districts. But being New Jersey, we can't stop there, right? We have to have 13 districts that don't have any schools. I want that job. Right? No students, no parents, no teachers. How New Jersey is that, right? I mean, come on. Forget about it. We serve 1.35 million students across the state. We have 7,182 certified arts teachers across the 4 arts disciplines, 29 unique arts courses or classes, establishing 60,000 individual courses offered. And when you look at it by the individual grade level, we're talking about 301,000 different sections of arts instruction serving 1.3 million students. So, looks complex, right? Geez, we're talking millions of records. So you want to see what it looks like? That. Have any of you seen something like this before? Come on, shout it out. What is it? It's a spreadsheet. This isn't rocket science. We're not flying to the moon. We've got columns and rows, okay? Right? So this one here says district identifier. So that tells us the district, Monroe Township. This tells us the building, Monroe Elementary School. This tells us the subject ID, 212. That represents elementary visual art. This tells us whether the teacher is properly certified or not. This gives us the teacher's name, the grade, and the number of students enrolled. All right? So Daniel McLaughlin, teaching at the elementary school in Monroe, has 48 students in his kindergarten art class. Okay? Oh, and his colleague, Tilly Coulter, she's got 48 students in her kindergarten music class. We have that level of data for every single school building in the state. So as a result, what we're looking at is millions of records. But it's just a bunch of columns, just millions and millions of rows. Okay? So that's what it looks like. So the big question is, what does it tell us? Does it really tell us anything? And that's where we're going to actually dig in to the real data. So if you'll bear with me for a second while I do my magic switcheroo here. This is New Jersey state data. This is from the live data system from the state of New Jersey, from our longitudinal data system. And here's what it tells us. This is just the landing page, the overview page. And it tells us right here that 93% of all schools offer one or more arts disciplines, serving 1.3 million students. Or in New Jersey, 97% of all of our students are served by arts education. This is real access data that we have. Then this will tell us at the percentage that have music, 87.5, the percentage that have visual art, the percentage in theater, 7.4, 6.2% with no arts, 4.1% with dance. But we know that the majority of our students, 88% of all students, are served by both music and visual art in the state of New Jersey. Then we can see how many teachers and in what parts of the disciplines. This represents our 7,800 teachers. And then when we look at the high school enrollment, we heard about high school today, it shows that we've got 50% of our students at the high school level in New Jersey are enrolled in one or more arts courses. 50%. Now, we have a graduation requirement that has to be fulfilled in New Jersey at the high school level. So if we were just bare minimum, what percentage would be up there? If you had to have one course in 4 years? 25%, right. So we're at 50%. So there's a significant number above the requirement that are actually participating. Over here you can see the students that are enrolled in each of the areas at the high school level, and you can see the percentage of students that it represents. But then we also have year-over-year growth, so you can see that while music and visual art tend to have the most students, the areas that are growing the most are dance and theater. And why is that important? Because for the past 5 years, the Geraldine R. Dodge Foundation has been investing in increasing dance. So when we talk about how do we know we're having impact, well, we measure, we count. That's how we tell the difference. So this is an overview, but this is not where it ends. This is where it begins. So now we go, well, what's it look like for Joe Q. Public in the state? So what you have over here is the map by county based on the percentage of students that are enrolled in one or more art forms. And you'll see that green is good, right. Red is, okay, the darker the green, the better. The darker the red, the worse. Over here in this column, it gives you the breakdown percentage enrollment for each individual art form and whether or not it is above or below the state average and by how much. Over here, it gives you the actual enrollment. And we can sit there based on the enrollment and say, well, who has the most students in dance? Oh, Leap Academy. Who has the most students in music? Oh, Hunterdon Central Regional. Who has the greatest number of all art students? Hunterdon Central High School. Or I could go up here and say, I just want to see what's happening in Hunterdon County. And boom, those are the high schools in Hunterdon County giving you the same information, and the graphs below, everything is redesigned based just on Hunterdon County. Or I can go, I'm going to go over here to Essex County. Who here lives in Essex County, New Jersey? There they are, the boys in gray, right? I'm sorry I didn't have a chance to go change before the sub. I tried to get my window gray suit on before the presentation. So now we're looking at just the schools in Essex County. So this way parents can come in and play with it and find information about their school. Or you can sit there and go, well, how has it changed year over year? So now this map is based on the percentage change year over year. And now we can see that certain counties have declined while other counties had increases. Now, over this period of time, the entire state had increased by 4%. So we actually had growth. But when we go down and look at the county level, we go, man, we've got some problems. So that red area up here, all the way to the west, this is called Hunterdon County. Hunterdon County is the most affluent community, or one of the most affluent counties in the United States. So why are their schools going down? And so we dig into it and we see that they've pretty much had declines across the board. This is not our poor communities. This is one of our wealthiest communities. So that allows us to go, where do we target our resources? Okay? If I see Hunterdon County is red, we're on the phone to Hunterdon County finding out what's going on with Hunterdon Central. Why are those particular schools, going against the grain of what we have for the entire state? So we can do this for dance or music or theater or visual art, or we can look at just the presence of arts in all schools. And if we wanted, we could come over here and pick on Essex County and go in and look at what's happening in South Orange, Maplewood. There we go. And now I'm looking at the presence of art programs in every single school building in South Orange, Maplewood. Okay? So now I'm able to attack the problem using a rifle to go to the place where the issue is and not by using a shotgun. But if that's not enough, I can come over here and go, well, I really want to know what's happening in Atlantic City. And so let's go to Atlantic City and see their public schools. And I want to know what's happening at the high school. So now the information is, you see the total student enrollment, the number of art educators, the FTE, full-time equivalent teachers that they have. We then get the art teacher-student ratios for the disciplines that they have offering from dance, music, or visual art. You see the teachers and their specific assignments, the percentage of students enrolled, the change year on year, the number of students enrolled, and the change year over year. That's the grain level. And if we want to, we can go down another level and start looking at it by grade. And we can then go from that all the way back to this is what it looks like at the state level. That is the power of longitudinal data. And that's the thing that I believe will help transform the work that we do. So, which brings us kind of to our next point. How do we know arts education data is driving transformation? Well, I just walked you through the New Jersey data. And so I'm going to tell you what we've learned since we've been doing some of our census reports and what we have with our new arts education data. This is from the report Keeping the Promise, the progress, plight, and power of arts education in New Jersey. And what we learned from our outcomes based on providing data, these are the changes that occurred. First, arts education was added to the state-mandated district accountability process. That means every 3 years the state sends a team into the district to do an analysis on whether or not they are adhering to state code. They included the arts to ensure that now when they go into the districts, the arts are included in accountability. The Department of Education launched an extensive review of schools that did not have arts programs. And once they did that, they then mandated that they come up with a remediation plan for 12 months. So they had to come up with a way to address why those programs were gone and what they were going to do to put them back. It empowered funders to align resources to areas of need. It led to the introduction of grade weighting legislation. How many have heard of grade weighting problems? Okay, grade weighting problems is when a high school will determine that an arts course at the high school level is not the same weight as an equivalent math or science course. Now, when they're not weighted equally, it creates an artificial barrier for a student who's concerned about their GPA. So now we have legislation to make that illegal in the state of New Jersey so that arts courses are treated equally with the other courses. In addition to that, in February, one of the most important things was to add the arts to our school report cards. New Jersey is the first state in the nation to include arts education measures in our school report card for every parent to see. How are they doing? In February of this year, we added teacher assignment data so that you could see the teachers by the individual arts discipline in the schools. And in January of 2016, we're going to actually be adding the explicit middle school course information to those same report cards. This is what happens when you have data to create change. So this is what a state report card looks like. Here we're saying arts education is in college and career readiness. How about that? Kind of where we want to be. This is for Watchung Hills Regional. It's where I'm actually on the board of education. And here you see it gives us the percentage of students in dance, and it compares it to the state average. The percentage of students in theater and the state average. Music, the state average. Visual arts, state average. And the total, 67.1% of the high school population is involved in the arts. The state average is 49.3%. Now, this is distinct number of students because we have unique student identifiers. We can determine who's involved in one or more arts disciplines so that we're not double counting. So that gives us the actual number of students that are actually involved. But the great thing now is that the media picks up on this. So our statewide publication, New Jersey Monthly, or Inside New Jersey, came out with their list of the best performing high schools for the state. They've been doing this every year for the past decade. This year, they added arts education measures to how they determine the best performing high schools in the state. And they said, it might surprise people, but I see the future for arts education as bright in New Jersey. And I concur. That's not to say that there are not issues that we have. We do have them. There are places that still go unserved, but we know that we're further along than we were in the past. But the biggest payout of this, the biggest benefit of this whole project, we saw a 90% decrease in the number of students who were going unserved without arts education. 90%. So when we're talking about how do we get to every child in every school, we are 90% of the way to reaching our goal. And the 10% that we're missing, we know exactly where they are. Okay? It's not just some theoretical place. We know the schools. We know the principals where these programs don't exist, so we can target our resources in a way that makes sense. So the impact of data, the transformational power of data, is create credibility. Numbers hold value and demonstrate quantitative evidence and gives you credibility in making the argument. Advocacy is telling the story about access and opportunity through statistics that are paired with your great anecdotal evidence. That pretty little girl with the flute in her hand becomes much more compelling when you have the numeric story to back her up. The community engagement piece, allowing individuals to see how their school is doing. And let's face it, human nature, we love to compare, right? I want to know that my school's doing better than this other school. And if they're not, I want to know why. I'm on the phone to my superintendent. Why do we have fewer kids involved in the arts than the school down the street? What's going on? It empowers parents to be engaged. And from a policy standpoint, it influences policy decisions to create positive change. So that brings us to the question, how do we exploit the data revolution? What's the opportunity? What's the solution to unleash this for all of our states? And the solution for this is the Arts Education Data Project. The Data Project is a project that we started to create with our good friends at CDE, who I mentioned before, the state education directors of arts education, and their colleagues around the country, along with Quadrant, have put together a plan to begin to standardize and make accessible state longitudinal data for the benefit of communities. What we're doing is we're taking a unified approach. It is a national effort that's coordinated at the individual state level. We're aligning the data to the unified course codes. We're basing it solely on existing data from the longitudinal data systems. We're making it objective. We're basing it on facts, not subjective based on opinions. We're also about capacity building, teaching the state departments of education how to use this data in a meaningful way to create change. It measures arts programs' availability and participation through the policies of each state. Arts education policies at the various states are very different. The policies in New Hampshire are different from the policies in Minnesota, they're different from the policies in California, and they're different from the policies in New Jersey. We can't use one lens to look at this. We have to look at the data through the lens of state individual policies. And it allows us to aggregate and disaggregate the data from the building level to the district, to the school, to the classroom, and all the way back up again, like we showed you earlier. And it makes the data accessible and usable for a broader audience. Now, the project team for this, with CDE, our director is Julie Palkowski, who is also CDE's president-elect, who's with us today. The leadership of Lynn Tuttle from Arizona and Marcia McCaffrey from New Hampshire, both in their state departments of education. Dr. Richard Baker from the state of Louisiana, and Corey Wilkerson, who is CDE's manager. All the states have the CDE members participating along with their state data managers. Because in order for us to have access to the data, we have to have access to the guy who's the gatekeeper to the data. And that's the data manager in every single state. Quadrant Research, I'm leading the project as project director. Dr. Pat Cirillo, who our friend Dina knows from the Gun Foundation, Pat lives in Cleveland. Dr. Cirillo has actually worked with me and co-authored every single arts education research report we've done for the past 12 years. Stephen McDaniel is our chief data scientist and architect. You don't know Stephen, but you know his work. How many of you have Netflix? How many of you use Netflix? Stephen was the data scientist behind the architecture of Netflix data system. So in order for us to manage big data, we needed a big data scientist to help us. And then Dr. Eileen McDaniel, she's the author of The Accidental Analyst. She helps take people who are novices in doing data analytics and trains them how to get knowledge out of these data systems. So the Arts Education Data Project, we start with data from other sources right here. And that can be the US Census Department, it can be other state agencies, and data that we get from the state departments of education through their data system. That then is fed into a cloud server. So it's sent up to our cloud server that is secure. It is then processed so that we can organize it and put it through proprietary code to combine and organize these large sets of data. The data is then put into a powerful and flexible analytic database, and then our analysts get in and work with it, and then from there the deliverable is every state gets a report on the status and condition of arts education in their state. We then make systems available, so the dashboard, like what you saw for New Jersey, is available for every state so they can embed it on their own websites or on their partner websites, and then the data system's available for additional research and other publications. So this is how it works. So this is how we get from 30 years ago California having one system to now where we have the opportunity to create a system that serves the needs of everybody. The first 4 states that we're working with this year are California, Wisconsin, Ohio, and North Carolina. We're already working with their state's data, and we hope to be turning out their data reports by this fall. And after that, we will expand to an additional 16 states next year, 20 states after that. So by the time we get to 2018, we will have a data system that covers 91% of the student population in the state. The formula for this is really simple. Research informs advocacy. Advocacy informs policy. Public policy then feeds the change, and the change leads to more arts education programs. The takeaway from all of this has to be data is not the end goal. Data is a means to an end, okay? And that end is what? Every child in every school. It's the reason why we're here. That's the point. You know, it's really about how do we get to every child in every school. So that's how we exploit the data revolution. And so what I want to do is walk you through today's answers. So we set up our questions. What are the answers? Today's answers are that arts education data provides insight to the critical questions we have of the day. That conditions now are creating a wealth of arts education data waiting to be exploited. That the states are ready, that the need exists to harness this data, that the data are visible, and it's been demonstrated to create positive change in our states. We know that partners are aligned and that the Arts Education Data Project has been created to allow us to exploit this opportunity. Now, have I answered all the questions? No, I haven't. There's one left. There's still one left. How many schools have instrumental music programs? 28 years later, the answer is 53,418. 53,418. What happened between 2009 and 2012? Did that number go up or did it go down? Down. Did it go down a lot or a little? It went down a lot. No, it didn't go down a lot. Between 2009 and 2012, the number of instrumental music programs that declined was 113. Less than 1/3 of 1% of all of our programs. Interesting, huh? You wouldn't think that that was right. But that underlines the point here that a friend of mine, Sir Ken Robinson, who had worked with me on some of our earlier data projects, I sat down with him to show him our first findings. And he's after going through the report, he sat across the desk from me, closed the book, and he said, "You know, Bob, without data, you're just another person with an opinion." And it's true. We're just there with anecdotes. We're pulling things out of thin air. We hope no one will challenge us. We're just another person with an opinion. And that's why data is so important. And I hope through this process you've come to see why data is my particular friend. And I hope in this process that data is your friend too. So thank you very much. And I hope you will join with us as part of the new data revolution for arts education.